when we have these stereotypes put on us, they're not as a result of someone's individual thought. They're a result of a whole huge movement of hatred against our people that infects a bunch of people.
My guest today is Westside Gravy, real name Noah Shufantinsky. Noah is a rapper and producer from San Diego, now based in Israel, who uses his music to rap about his identity as a Black Jewish man, as well as the anti-Semitism and racism that exists in our society. Noah, thanks so much for being here. How are you doing?
I'm doing really amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
Not at all. Now, would you feel more comfortable if you go by Noah or Westside Gravy? I don't know what you prefer.
Whichever one you're comfortable with, I'll respond to either.
Okay,
But
fine. That's very good. Look, I want to thank you for doing the podcast. I also want to thank Ellie Goldsmith from Unity Bookings for making this happen. Very helpful guy as always. And he can be reached at unityinspiresprojects@gmail.com or on Instagram at Unity Inspires Project. So thank you and thank him. Look, I want to know first off, how did you get into rapping and producing?
so I've always been like a writer as far as a way to express myself. I found like old notebooks I have from when I was like a little kid. I'd write verses and lyrics just to kind of touch on whatever I was going through at the time. It's kind of funny sometimes going back and reading it, but it's also like a cool reminder to see how that's been like a constant thing in my life. And then as far as producing, like I was always interested in that aspect too. There was always like a couple YouTube channels that I'd watch about different producers, just watch how they'd make beats. And then once I started taking it more and more seriously, uh, I wanted to be able to rap over beats that I could put out that were 100% original. So I kind of got into that. And it's good that I did because I fell in love with it. That's like one of my favorite parts of making music now, is because it really gives me like full creative control over what sounds I want in a beat. How's that going to relate to the lyrics, the whole idea for a song. So yeah, I've just always been musical when it comes to expressing myself.
Yeah, I mean, with producing and making beats, I think it's like a bit easier for someone of your age, maybe compared to someone 20 years ago, because now you can just go on YouTube, type J. Cole type beat, and everything's there for you, you know?
Yeah, for sure. That's one thing that it's so easy. And then even from the perspective of being like a producer and wanting to make beats, it's so much easier to do that nowadays than it would have been back in the day. I can do it all from a laptop. I've made beats on airplanes, on trains,
Wow.
like
Yeah.
just straight up just off my laptop with some headphones, sometimes even just AirPods if I don't have my full like headphone set. So it makes everything really accessible and there's sounds and different instruments from all over the world I can download off the
Yeah.
internet and put in my beats.
Yeah, that's awesome. So who did you like growing up, rap or non-rap?
So I listen to a lot of different genres. I'm glad that you opened it up to rap and also non-hip hop. So I mean, I grew up listening to like Bob Marley and stuff. My parents would always play it. I'm a good California boy. Grew up listening to my oldies, some Sam Cooke, some Richie Valens, War, all of that. So one thing I appreciated about all that music was even if it's something that like you don't want to hear me try to hold one of those melodies, but even if it's something that's not hip hop, is it's like getting a taste, getting a window into someone else's culture, getting a window into different history, and I think it opens up the world to and to the listener. I didn't live the life or live in the place or even the time period that like Bob Marley or Sam Cooke grew up in, but because they're able to put their experiences in music, I was able to sort of understand a little bit that I wouldn't from like a human perspective. And then when it came to hip hop, there's a lot of hip hop in my house too. A lot of old school West Coast hip hop. I really liked artists who got creative with the ways they told stories. Sort of same thing, giving me a window into their life. So plenty of Tupac. Listen to some E40. I love how he's creative with his flows and stuff that he uses. Different word choice, and also musically from the production standpoint, the fact that in the West Coast, like these artists will sample old funk music or soul music that like I would have grown up listening to anyway.
Yeah.
And incorporating that into hip hop, it really encapsulates like the West Coast culture and showcases a different side of it even than what I grew up on.
Yeah, I think Tupac's an interesting name that you brought up because, like Tupac, you're also from the West Coast, and also like Tupac, your rap is quite socially conscious. You talk about your experiences and sort of things that are going on in society. Was that a sort of conscious decision that you thought one day I want to make my music like this, or did it just happen?
Um, I think it sort of just happened, and I think also like that, like the artist I grew up listening to, Tupac, for example, is like he really is someone who I think does something that's really important with music, which is like humanizing himself, and through that, humanizing all the people he speaks for. So he has a lot of socially conscious songs. He has some more political songs. He has some songs that are just personal, telling his own personal story and things he grew up around, and also some just fun songs. And I think it's good to have that balance, not to be pigeonholed to one or the other. So I think I kind of just took after that a little bit, and I like to, share a little bit about my experience in general. And a huge part of that is stuff that is like interpreted as or is blatantly like intentionally socially conscious. So I think because I grew up listening to his type of music, that's kind of automatically something that I was inclined to do.
Yeah. I mean, look, let's a common theme in your music is your identity as a black Jewish man. And I'm going to quote one of your lyrics. I'm not going to rap it because that would be embarrassing, but I'm gonna say it in your song called "Wish You Would Too." You rap, "Mama worried about me every time I leave the house because I'm a black man in a black kippah." How concerning is the anti-Semitism and racism that comes with being a proud black Jewish man for you and your family?
I think that's a really interesting question regarding like how concerning it is because on one end, it's very concerning, especially being like an older brother with younger siblings, just being a brother in general, even with an older brother, thinking about what are my family members, the people I care about, going to have to go through when they step into the world. And I think a lot of times there's a conversation about the talk that black parents have with their black children regarding how to interact if you're getting profiled or harassed by anyone, really. But especially people talk about it when it comes to like issues of police brutality. And there's also a similar thing that has to do with being Jewish and publicly identifying as Jewish. There's been times where I've been harassed and had things yelled at me and for being identifiable as a Jewish man. And I think that's very concerning, especially because it's like on one hand you have the right, and like I'm sure we'll get into it a little later because it's really a main theme of the song "Wish You Would Too." Um, but I think at the same time, it's like you should be able to go out and not hide aspects of your identity that are immutable, that are not like you can't change them, you can't hide them, or else you're hiding a part of yourself. And at the same time, it's about being conscious of whatever situation you're in. So it's like, I mean, I think kind of getting into this song a little bit more, I'd love to. It's actually a sequel to a song that I wrote called Wish You Would a couple years ago, where I released my song Diaspora. And shortly after, I got like some online backlash on Twitter. I was getting death threats, the norm for Jewish people online. Um, and the song Wish You Would was kind of like, it was just like a song that I was saying, all right, like you guys are saying all this stuff to me as if I haven't already heard it in person, as if I haven't already dealt with it. So it's kind of like spinning it back, like, all right, you want to talk all this on Twitter, like I wish you would. And Wish You Would Too was just something that I wrote years later, kind of following up on that because it's not something that stopped after Diaspora ended. So I was just trying to make a follow up to show that that's an emotion, that's something that I felt personally at the time after I released Diaspora. And then now this is like, I feel like a climate that a lot of people are dealing with and are feeling, whether they're members of the Jewish community or the Black community or both.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, to me, the theme of "Wish You Would Too" is this feeling of why should I have to hide who I am? Why should I back down? I'm going to quote you again. Please forgive me. You say, "Why do I got to be the one to pay the price and change my life? It just ain't right to trade my sight and see myself through hatred's eyes." That I thought was very powerful. And I think many Jews can relate to this feeling of injustice. What inspired this line? What are you thinking when you're writing this line?
So I'm really happy that you actually like noticed that because honestly, after I wrote that line, like there's a couple times where I've written songs and I write a line and I'm like, yeah, this is it. This sums up everything that I'm trying to say perfectly and it flows well, like in my mind. So I'm really happy that you chose that. so like sort of philosophically, ideologically, what I was getting at a bit is like there's this idea of like double consciousness, and I'm not going to dive into like all the intricacies of like different philosophers and idealists from all sorts of different political movements, but there's this idea that originated, even talking specifically about the Black experience, that if you're walking around, you have to be conscious not only of who you are as a person, but also how you're perceived. And that's something that is like a burden that everyone has to carry in order to walk through the world safely. And at the same time, it's not something that's always fair, because I get perceived as all sorts of things just because of stereotypes, unfair stereotypes of other people. So I was kind of trying to play on that, and at the same time humanize what it means to be a Jewish person, because I'm speaking from a first person perspective. Is why should I have to change everything about myself? But when I'm flipping it and I'm saying to see myself through hatred's eyes, I'm not saying see myself through an individual person who hates me's eyes. I'm saying hatred as a whole, because when we have these stereotypes put on us, they're not as a result of someone's individual thought. A result of a whole huge movement of hatred against our people that infects a bunch of people, to hold these stereotypes and negative prejudices against us. So when I'm rapping this, like it's kind of standing up and saying like, listen, I'm not gonna take on that responsibility and burden without questioning how unfair it is that I have to change my life, whether that means try and hide parts of myself, try and act certain types of ways that are more acceptable according to stereotype. Like, why should I have to change that and trade my sight, trade my consciousness, trade how I see myself, how I know about myself, who I am, to see myself through the eyes of someone who's representing a whole entire spectrum of hatred?
Yeah, and there is this. Um, Unfortunately, there is a school of thought where the way to get through anti-Semitism is just to keep your head down, don't make a fuss. In campaign against anti-Semitism's most recent annual polling of British Jewry, we revealed that a record 46% of respondents said that they try not to show visible signs of their Judaism when they go out because of anti-Semitism, which is incredibly sad. And it seems that your way of dealing with this injustice is actually to say, no, I'm going to wear my kippah, I'm going to wear my Magen David. Why shouldn't I do that?
Yeah, I think to like start off with, like, is wearing a kippah is something that I began, like, I'd always wear a kippah when I was going to synagogue or praying or Shabbat. I started to do it on a daily basis just as part of my own like religious observance spiritual journey. Like everyone has their own that they'll connect to, and their minhagim and mitzvot that they'll connect to. So that's something that I came to personally, and more so when I'm in environments where I feel like I'm dealing with anti-Semitism, which I mean is not in Israel, but outside of Israel in the diaspora, it's less of like I'm gonna wear it to spite anti-Semites, but it's more about, okay, like this is something that I do because I personally connect with it. It doesn't feel right for me to change that or to hide it about myself, because that's a part of me, the same way as anything else that you see about me. My skin color, my hair texture, my facial features are a part of me. And I think that when it comes to things like wearing a Magen David and being proud of being Jews, this is something that actually Isabella Hazan, a friend of mine, and she was also, I believe, featured here.
She's on the podcast, yeah.
Yeah, she told me how great it was, how great of a time she had.
Oh, that's
Um,
so nice.
but this is something that I learned from her as well. It was like philosophically, what she was saying is like, as an individual, I can't like just come out and tell someone what to do, how to identify, how to be out here in public, what's going to be safe or unsafe for them, because I don't know what situation they're in. I haven't walked them out in their shoes. Um, and I need to like be conscious of that. I can't be out here telling everyone, like at the end of the day, it's important for people to be safe. Long term though, for the Jewish community as a whole, it's more dangerous for us to normalize hiding our identity and keeping our heads down, as a community. So I think the most important thing is for us to be able to build these resources, to support each other, because it's not like we're going to be able to be out and proud as Jews everywhere, but we need to be able to support each other and defend ourselves when issues arise from that, to get to the point where we feel comfortable identifying as a community in public as Jews.
Definitely, definitely. Now you mentioned anti-Semitism there. You actually have an entire song about anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic tropes, which is, despite the subject matter, is actually very funny. One of your songs is called Benjamin's Baby, all about anti-Semitic tropes. The title itself is a reference to Ilan Omar. She tweeted about money and APAC, a pro-Israel group. You also feature quotes from the former KKK leader David Duke and the anti-Semitic hate preacher Louis Farrakhan. The lyrics are poignant, witty, smart. What prompted you to write an entire song about anti-Semitism? And also, am I right in thinking that you're doing it from the character of a a powerful Jewish politician?
Yeah, you're really picking up on all my favorite lyrics and songs and concepts. Like, I'm glad I get a chance to talk about them. Yeah, so what prompted me to write this song was honestly seeing how not even similar, I'll say identical, the stereotypes and the tropes and the hate speech against Jews is across the political spectrum. And also growing up like in the United States, it's very easy for me. I also went to university at George Washington University. It's a very political school. It's in the capital, Washington, D.C. Um, Something I'd witness all the time is people on different ends of the political spectrum trying to ignore the anti-Semitism that occurred within their movements and blame only other rival political movements for anti-Semitism. And I see some people kind of fall for it. And for me, it was important to point out, like, you can be involved and have political opinions about one thing or another, whoever you're going to support based on a whole bunch of topics, being a citizen of the United States. But it's very irresponsible to not recognize the fact that anti Semitism is not a political movement. It's not something that's tied to a political party or a political ideology. It's a form of hatred that infects all sorts of different political leaders. So
Yeah.
you look at someone like David Duke, who's someone on the far right. You look at someone like Louis Farrakhan, who, though his values are not congruent with actual left wing values, is identified and oftentimes praised by people on the far left. And the things that they say about Jewish people and the Jewish extremist Zionists are identical. The dehumanization is identical. The tropes that they use about Jews and money, whether it's from the right wing or the left wing, they're identical tropes. And it's important for us as Jewish people to recognize that our civilization, our culture, our history predates all of these political parties that are trying to blame the other side for anti Semitism, and our hatred does as well. So the sooner we come to terms with that and recognize the threat of anti Semitism as a whole, the easier it will be for us to move forward united as Jews.
100%. It really frustrates me when anti-Semitism becomes politicized and assigned to a certain side, when actually it's like, no, this is across the board and it manifests itself in so many different ways and so many different conspiracy theories, which you seem to manage to fit every single one into this song. I mean, you managed to fit in the blood libel, media control, Elders of Zion, Great Replacement Theory, to name a few. Like, there's so many more. What did the writing process look like for this? Was there like a lot of research involved?
Um, I don't know if there's a bunch of research involved for the particular song. I feel like actually the writing process came out of the fact that I was exposed to all this, just seeing all this stuff happen on the news and hip hop being the way I express myself. I knew like, okay, this would be a clever song, like Benjamin's Baby, and also like Benjamin's Baby was originally like a hip hop reference. Actually, it's funny. I actually spoke to a UK group before and went and explained Benjamin's Baby from beginning to end. And then I realized like it's not even something I thought about, that it's about like the currency of the United States that
Yeah.
not everyone in the audience was familiar with. So Benjamin Franklin, historical figure in the United States, is on the $100 bill. The idea of all about the Benjamin's Baby was a tweet that Ilhan Omar tweeted about, sort of trying to say that Jewish lobbies control the U.S. and only care about money, et cetera, et cetera. So very classic anti-Semitic trope. So I thought it's cool to kind of take something that she took from hip hop to use in an anti-Semitic way, and for me to take that and bring it back into hip hop. So the process was, I knew that I wanted to do a song called "All About the Benjamin's Baby," and I kind of came up with the chorus about it, which is like, in a way, it's like pretend, like you said, taking this character of like the stereotypical powerful Jew, kind of taking the stereotype and putting it on its head, and at the same time highlighting the fact that people are saying Jews are more loyal to each other than they are to anywhere else, to anyone else. But naturally, by consistently putting that hatred on Jewish people, who do you expect Jewish people to trust?
Mm.
So that's sort of the meaning of the chorus of that song. And then as far as incorporating all the stereotypes for me, I honestly had a field day. It was really fun for me to write that song. Because it's like taking all this great, it's a very Jewish thing, you know, it's a very black thing too, this dark humor. So I had a field day with it. Putting together the music video for it, editing it all after it was filmed was a little bit much. I will say I was up for hours and hours just
Yeah.
getting footage, putting it in, looking at like me represented in these anti-Semitic tropes, and by the end, I was kind of exhausted. But then seeing the final product come together was really cool, and then seeing the response was really great. If I could talk about that for a minute.
Please.
I thought it was really cool because my non-Jewish friends, some of whom weren't even aware of some of these anti-Semitic tropes or weren't conscious of them or weren't aware of these controversies that such huge public figures were involved in, were traumatized. They're like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you just talked about it like that. Like, it must have been so traumatizing." And then all my Jewish friends were cracking up. They thought the video was hilarious. So it's kind of cool to see that contrast, how something can be used to be humorous but also serious,
Yeah.
and for other people, it can be something that's just very serious and educational, depending on their backgrounds.
Yeah, I mean, often I think the best way of educating people is through humor, because it's going to resonate, and there's not this feeling of them going, "All right, I get it, enough of the lecturing." They're being entertained, but also they're being educated at the same time. What I mean, in all seriousness, you talk about your non-Jewish friends asking if you're traumatized or whatever, and I don't think you were, but in all seriousness, um, do you find when you're writing songs about anti-Semitism or racism versus Jewish pride and more, I suppose, uplifting or positive music, is there a difference in in the mental health aspect in terms of writing or once it's released or any of that?
That's a really good question and thing for me to grapple with. Um, I think in general, my songs are like therapeutic in a sense, like the songwriting process. It could even be just a fun song for me. Like I can share. I remember when I was trying to make the decision about where I was going to go to university, I was stuck between going to GW and going to college in California, where I spent most of my life, my upbringing. Um, and there's a huge part of me that was just like, man, like I don't know if I'm making the right decision. I like California feels like home, and I ended up writing a song called like California Dream and sampling the oldie, and even that was like therapeutic a little bit. After I wrote that song, like mixed it, I was like, okay, I got a lot of this like nostalgia out of my system, and like I can really look at something with like a clear head. So I think when it comes to whether it's a song about Jewish pride, whether it's a song about just my culture as a Black Jew in general, whether it's about racism or anti-Semitism, it all kind of results in the same out outcome as far as me being feeling almost like a weight off my shoulders. Like okay, all these things that I had in my mind, these thoughts, I was able to make them concise and fit into like a specific parameter when it comes to rhyming and timing and all of that. Um, and it's really therapeutic because it makes me have to like grapple with whatever I'm thinking and fit it into a specific structure. And that kind of helps me get to the point and the root. I'd say after when I really do realize it, sort of to get to your question, is when it comes to performing, because when I'm performing a song, I have to like pay attention to audience feedback. I have to pay attention to okay, this is not something that the audience is gonna hear and choose when they're gonna listen to it. I'm literally giving them this information. Like they're got a ticket to the show, they're in the audience, and I get to choose what they're gonna hear and how they're gonna feel and what information they're gonna receive. And they can process it however they want. But obviously, if I'm gonna perform a song that's dark and like maybe a little bit of a downtrodden song, most likely they're going to feel much more downtrodden than if they listen to a song like, I don't know, maybe Diaspora, which is more uplifting. So then I have to be more conscious and sort of think about, okay, what's the outcome of each song? How's that going to make people feel? And also, how do I feel? Because all that energy like gets reflected right back.
Yeah. I mean, in a sense, when it's a live performance, you're essentially curating the show. You're sort of the DJ for your own song. So you've got to be paying attention to the vibe. Is this right? Am I going to bring people down with this? Is everyone having a good time?
Yeah, and sometimes it's okay to bring people down. Like sometimes that's the purpose of it, but like I have to put thought into
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to sort of get on to hip hop in general. Now, we had a previous guest on the podcast, the Hasidic hip hop artist Moshe Reuven. He talked about anti-Semitism in hip hop, which you don't need me to tell you has been a long-standing issue. You know, Noah, we've seen lyrics referencing Jews and money from more than a few people. We've also seen in rappers' personal lives anti-Semitism. Would you say there is an anti-Semitism issue in hip hop?
I'd say there's an anti-Semitism issue in society, and I think hip hop's a reflection of society. So you get that, and I think you can draw like direct parallels to other, like to the way anti-Semitism manifests throughout society. So when it comes to rappers making having lyrics about this stereotype of Jews and money, there have been plenty of rappers who've made those comments and made those lyrics, and they've come out and said, you know, I didn't really know that this was a history. I apologize for offending the Jewish community. It's just something that I saw and thought was not offensive, which you also get in regular society. You get public figures and people in general, even like I have friends who've had their friends say this sort of stuff to them. I've had people say this sort of stuff to me about, oh, the Jews being rich, not having a full or claiming to not have a full understanding of that trope. And then they apologize. So you get that anti Semitism that comes from ignorance, and whether they choose to apologize or not shows whether they're actually just ignorant about it or whether they're using that as a cover. And then you have hateful anti Semitism, like what we saw with Wiley. I mean, he sounded like a lunatic if you listen to that. Like, conspiracy theories and stuff he's saying. I listen to a lot of UK rap as well. I listen to rap from everywhere. So I was familiar with
Okay.
Wiley before then, some of his music. And then I remember him coming out saying all this stuff. And I was like, what? Like, this guy just sounds like a madman. And that's clearly coming
Yeah.
from a place of hate. And again, like you could draw a parallel to that in wider society throughout the whole world, where you have honestly just hateful individuals. And I think that hip hop and music, the reason it becomes maybe more dangerous or sometimes is under more of a spotlight is because those other examples of anti-Semitism I gave just now about people being ignorant about tropes, so on and so forth, those are a result of me having an individual reaction with someone or interaction with somebody where I can hear something, call it out, get to the bottom of it. When it's an artist who's putting these tropes into something that's going to be consumed worldwide, even in places where people don't have a Jewish community or population to even compare that to, it's much more dangerous because it spreads so much faster. So I think that kind of goes in line with the issue of anti-Semitism in media as a whole, but also is a reason why there's something to be said about the issue of anti-Semitism within hip hop.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's more than fair. Now, I want to go to you and your Jewish upbringing. What did that look like, and what does your Jewish identity look like today?
Yeah, I was always raised in a very, very Jewish, related to, especially related to Israel household. My parents always raised me to have an understanding that like Israel's the homeland, that homeland is something important, that that's the roots of our identity, that our traditions come from our people who really came to be here in this land in Israel. So my parents were very happy when my older brother first, my older brother Dimitri made Aliyah and sort of inspired me to continue in his footsteps. They're very happy. Obviously, they're gonna like miss their kids, but they're really happy that we made the choice to come here and live where our people come from. And I think that my Jewish identity in Israel has, I would say, progressed. I don't want to say like strengthened or weakened because I understand it's like it's hard to like kind of define that because everyone finds their relationship to their Judaism in different ways, whether it's religiously, culturally, historically, you know, however someone wants to define it. But I think one thing living in Israel has allowed me to do is explore my Jewish identity unrelated to anti-Semitism, unrelated to a reaction to what I feel is pressure from the outside world living in Galut, putting on the Jewish community. So I really appreciate that, and I think that's something that I hope every Jewish person has a chance to experience because we have traditions that predate anti-Semitism. So I think it's a mistake to get caught up in the trap of letting anti-Semitism define our Jewish identities.
Definitely, definitely. We absolutely must not be defined by other people's hatred of us. Now, you know, the flip side of that is Jewish pride, which to me is a big theme of your vibe, and it's also a big theme of you know, Isabella Hazan's vibe, who you mentioned earlier. What does Jewish pride mean to you? Because it means so many different things, so many different people.
Yeah, and I want to also give a shout out to Ben Freeman, who wrote the book Jewish Pride and also the sequel, because I think
Yeah,
he finds it really well.
friend of the podcast.
Yeah, he's amazing. Like,
He's
I had
great.
a chance to actually meet him in person. It's cool. Like Corona, sort of winding down has given me the chance to meet so many people that I'd only known online. So, yeah, I mean, reading his book, I think, is something I'd recommend for everyone. But I think Jewish pride for me manifests in me incorporating elements of my Jewish identity into my daily life. So, one thing that I can share is like keeping kosher for me. That's a personal thing that I think I've I can relate to a lot as far as my Jewish identity. Thinking about we have this practice and these laws of even the way that we eat. That's the most basic element. I love food anyway, but like that's the basic element of humanity. is our sustenance, how we like the food that literally comes from the land that we live on, and the fact that we have a set of laws that defined our national identity in ancient times that's continued, and that's based here on the land that we belong to. I think is a way that I personally have connected to my Judaism, and something that I'm personally proud of as one of the mitzvot that I keep. And for other people, I know it changes. I know also Shabbat is something that I really appreciate bringing into my daily, I mean, more weekly life, but sort of restructuring the way that I think about what I have going on in the world, sort of everything that I've going on during the week, and sort of what my week looks like. It's very easy to do in Israel, but even in the diaspora where everyone's busy and has that hustle and bustle, understanding that that practice is something that united the diaspora, spread all throughout the earth, and keeping hold of that tradition is something that I've really appreciated, and it also brings people together. There's nothing that makes me more proud to be a Jew than being with a group of a bunch of other proud Jews, and for me, Shabbat is a very easy way for that to kind of happen and coalesce.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's clearly a huge, huge part of your identity, and you've incorporated this identity into your music in many different ways. And one of those ways is the languages in which you rap. Now, obviously, you rap in English, you also rap in Hebrew, you also rap in Russian. Have you found that by performing music in so many different languages, you connect to different aspects of your identity in this way?
Yeah, I really do. I believe language is super important when it comes to, in general, like keeping a culture. I think it's amazing. It's a miracle to think that this language that the Jewish people spoke in ancient times is something that I speak today when I go out in the street, and just even something as simple as wanting to go order a falafel, like, or talking to the person at the gas station. It's the same language. And I think it's also beautiful to think how the alphabet that we use in Hebrew that was developed from ancient times spread throughout the world, even in non-Hebrew languages, whether it's Yiddish or Ladino or different elements of Judeo-Arabic, Temanit, where they still use the Hebrew alphabet and preserve that. So I think when I put Hebrew into my lyrics, it's something that is universal amongst the Jewish people and can bring everyone, whether they understand it or not. But it's like a source of like recognition for one another, to understand that we have this linguistic connection that we've preserved for thousands of years. And then when it comes to like the Russian that you mentioned, my dad being from the Soviet Union, I think that's also something that kind of like blends the idea of art. We have this connection from thousands of years ago, and within that, we have a bunch of different diaspora experiences that we've had. So the same as Jews who, like, obviously I'm rapping English. I'm an American Jew, like from my background, something that I can have that camaraderie with Americans, and when Israelis hear it, they can also recognize, okay, this is someone from America who's returned home to his roots to Israel. And I think the same is true for people from the former Soviet Union. When they hear certain references I'll make about my Soviet Jewish culture, it's something that they automatically can connect to, and appreciate and relate to.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, you just get along with everyone. uh, I mean, so were these languages present growing up? Are you fluent in Hebrew? Are you fluent in Russian?
So no, I'm not fluent in Russian. I can understand a bit. I can read it pretty well. But I can only speak like some basic phrases and stuff.
Enough to rap it though. That's
Yeah, enough to rap. It's funny. It's funny. Some of these like words, like I didn't know how to write them. Like I have a song IDK. It's like "Я не знаю," it means I don't know in Russian, and that's like three, I guess, three Russian words. But like I've only ever heard it in conversation with like family members, so I had no
yeah,
idea of words it actually was when I'm rapping it. I just knew that this is a phrase that means I don't know.
yeah, yeah. And now you've done a lot of traveling around the world, and you've performed in so many different countries and cities. What are some of the differences you've noticed in Jewish communities around the world?
Um, so some differences I've noticed, I'd say, is figuring out like which communities hold different parts of Judaism is most like key to their practice. So I think in the United States, the idea of like religiosity is super important. Like as far as people defining how Jewish they are, which I think is already a problematic concept, but I'd get into that later or at another time. But that's why you can have Jews of different denominations in the U.S. who, regardless of their level of like observance or interpretation of mitzvot, can all describe themselves as religious or observant. And I think that that's something that's beautiful because it shows that people are able to adapt to their surroundings. And at the same time, you have other places like in Israel, where, in my neighborhood, especially where I am now, but also something I experienced when I was in Canada and Montreal, where you don't really have these divisions of different like denominations. You have people who are Jewish. Some are more secular, some are more observant, but they're all Jewish, and I think that's also beautiful because it shows that people are united in their identity, and there's also room for growth, or for progression, however they view their spiritual observance, and I think that's really cool to see. Something that I'll say, I want to give a shout out to the Jewish community of Paris. I had a chance to be in Paris for a European Jewish Association event, to perform there, and honestly, that was one of the most welcoming Jewish communities I've ever encountered outside of Israel. Um, I don't know if it has to do with the fact that you have Jewish communities who had been there for a long time. And then you also have like the Maghrebi immigrants who came from Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, to France. So there's like this feeling of needing to like stick together and welcome in one another. But everyone was extremely welcoming there, and I thought it was really cool to see that because again, you had people of different observance levels being able to like stay in the same space together, the same Jewish spaces, and also respect our traditions, which I thought was really cool to see.
Yeah, that's lovely. Let's go back to something you mentioned a moment ago when you spoke about America and you said there's this thing about how religious you are. And am I right in thinking that your issue is you essentially an element of competitiveness, trying to say we should be more religious. I'm this level. Is that right, or I got that wrong?
I think that's definitely a part of it. That's how it manifests. I think in general, it's important for us to start at the base. Like, there's a lot of people in America who are less observant, more observant, whatever. And when someone asks them, "Are you Jewish?" their response is, "Oh, kind of, oh, a little bit," or "Yeah, I'm Jewish, but." Um, and I think it's problematic because that's not coming from our tradition. Like, our tradition comes from the perspective of if you're Jewish, you're Jewish. Zil. From there, if you want to talk about how observant you are, how many mitzvot you keep, like you can continue. But a Jew is a Jew. So I think when people don't come at it from that perspective, it becomes a little bit problematic, and it makes our community more divided. And I think it's important to recognize that's not something that comes from our tradition. So I think it's important to shift how we talk about that a little bit and to recognize that there are people of different denominations in the United States and North America at large, but especially in the United States. And I also know to a certain extent in the UK from my travels there. Um, where you have these different denominations and they'll observe things differently and they have different interpretations, and it's not like they all get along. Like, there's plenty of controversy about it, but at the end of the day, those people are gonna define themselves as Jewish, as religiously Jewish, or as not religiously Jewish, but as Jewish to begin with, regardless of what denomination they're from. um, and I think that that's something that's positive to see.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually wanted to ask you about your trip to the UK. I want to ask specifically, how have you found London? And please be honest, do not be deterred by the fact that London is my hometown. How have you found London?
So I've been there a lot. I actually love London. I say all the time, like, it's probably my favorite city in the world.
That's the correct answer.
Yeah, no, but honestly, like, as far as being a city, having everything, I love the fact that there's so many different cultures living there. That you can go to different neighborhoods and see, and everywhere has its own character. I will like say as a disclaimer, I'm not a particularly like city person. I grew up in San Diego, it's very slow paced. Now I live in Givat Olga, very relaxed city by the beach. But for when it comes to actually going to a city and seeing what there is like to actually live a city life, I think that London is one of those places that it's hard to be compared to. So yeah, I really loved it. I thought also the Jewish community there was really cool and welcoming when I was there. And the food was amazing. Like, the food was absolutely amazing.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Now, I want to ask you a question that I ask all of our guests. If someone approaches you and says they want to help in the fight against anti-Semitism, and they're not Jewish and they don't really know loads about anti-Semitism, what should they do? Where should they start?
So I'd say to begin with, it's important to like seek out and hear Jewish voices from different generations about anti-Semitism. Because I think that if you listen to voices of different generations, you come to find that a lot of the issues that we're facing now, we've dealt with before. And a lot of what you see nowadays with people trying to say anti-Semitism isn't an issue is this perspective that, oh, the Holocaust is over, anti-Semitism is no longer an issue, or oh, like the Soviet Union fell, anti-Semitism is no longer an issue, or oh, like the Iranian regime lets their 10,000 out of like 100,000 Jews who used to be there live in peace as long as they don't mention anything about Israel. Like, anti-Semitism is not an issue. There's not pogroms happening against them like how there were back in the day, and more so in other places in the world like Poland and Algeria and Libya. But nevertheless, anti-Semitism has continued to persist, and it's still relying on the same tropes of Jewish power and Jewish privilege and the false idea of Jewish supremacy, and then more sinister tropes about like, honestly, these are things I'll never understand because our tradition doesn't talk about like Satan and hell and all this stuff, but these ideas of like killing the Christ and all this kind of, and it's operating on the same premise. So even if it looks like it's changed and the situation on the ground looks different, it's important to follow different generations. So that means reading authors from, whether that's poems written about the pogroms that happened in all across Europe. The Kishinev pogrom is the most famous work that people discuss with City of Slaughter. If people are reading the various accounts of Holocaust memories, I think that's something that's super important. Also, there's understanding that how the Holocaust affected world Jewry, obviously in Europe, but also in North Africa, also in the Middle East, and understanding that everyone was going through this period of anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic violence that was rooted in Nazi ideology, but this Nazi ideology was also spread and very quickly adopted by other people who couldn't be defined as white supremacists because they were not white. So kind of understanding that history and hearing those stories and trying to do the best to make sure that Holocaust survivors feel valued and listened to, and that their stories and experiences are valued. And then also seeking out, you have a whole generation between then and now of Jews who, whether they fled the Soviet Union or Iran or Libya, or what they're dealing with in France and the UK right now, or even the United States or South America, understanding these narratives of where the Jewish people came from and the different experiences of anti-Semitism and kind of trying to draw that parallel. And then obviously that brings us to today. But I think really having this multi-generational approach and not trying to focus just on one specific time period and think, oh, that's done with, so that means anti-Semitism's over.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that's great. Westside Gravy. Before we go, please tell the listeners, what have you got going on? Where can people find you?
All right, so you can find me all social media platforms, all streaming platforms, just as Westside Gravy. Have a lot of new music on the way. Probably after the Chagim, I'm gonna release a new music lyric video.
That's awesome. All right, Westside Gravy. Thank you so much for coming on Podcast Against Anti-Semitism.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.